It was a quiet afternoon at the city market. The sun poured golden light over the cobblestone streets, warming the laughter of families and the chatter of vendors. Children ran past with ice cream in hand, their squeals mingling with the soft melody of a street musician playing a violin nearby. The aroma of fresh bread, ripe fruit, and spices filled the air. On the surface, everything seemed perfectly ordinary, a typical peaceful day where nothing could possibly go wrong. In the middle of this calm, an older man walked slowly down the aisle, his hands tucked behind his back. He moved with the kind of steady, deliberate calm that comes from years of experience, eyes scanning the market, taking in small details others missed, the tilt of a sign, the way a fruit basket wobbled, the fleeting glances of strangers. There was something almost magnetic about him. People noticed him without really knowing why. No one, however, was prepared for what was about to happen. Among the crowd, a figure moved differently, sharp, aggressive, impatient. A man who thought the world owed him respect, yet had no intention of earning it. He wasn't just in a hurry. He was looking for a moment to assert dominance. And he found it. It was about to become the kind of moment people would never forget. A moment where calm would meet chaos, and a simple mistake would turn into a spectacle of consequences. Because in this crowded market, filled with laughter and life, one man was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. And no one, not even the people around them, had any idea how quickly the peaceful afternoon would shatter. The older man moved slowly between the stalls, his calm demeanor almost hypnotic against the bustling chaos of the market. Children darted around him, weaving past shoppers and carts filled with fruits and vegetables. The sun reflected off metal signs, glinting in the older man's eyes as he observed everything with quiet patience. To anyone else, he seemed harmless, just another man enjoying the day. But there was something different in the way he carried himself, a quiet confidence, like someone who had lived through storms and never flinched. A few steps ahead, a figure appeared, a tall man, broad-shouldered, moving with purpose. He wasn't here to browse or enjoy the market. His eyes scanned the crowd with impatience and disdain. Every step he took radiated arrogance. He bumped into shoppers without apology, muttered impatiently, and barked at vendors for taking too long. He was used to being noticed, to being feared, to getting his way without question. And then it happened. The bully's elbow grazed the older man's shoulder. Not violently, but deliberately enough to make the older man stumble slightly. "Watch where you're going, old man." The man snapped, his voice cutting like a whip, his face twisted in irritation, eyes narrowing as if daring the older man to respond. The older man didn't react with anger. He didn't shout or push back. Instead, he turned slowly, eyes steady, voice calm and measured. "I apologize," he said softly. "It was not my intention to be in your way." There was no fear in his tone, no hesitation, just the kind of composure that made the air itself seem heavier. For a moment, the bully paused, confused. No one had ever spoken to him like that before. He was used to people cowering to anger met with submission. But the older man wasn't cowering. He wasn't even tense. He was calm. The crowd around them began to notice. Phones emerged from pockets. Eyes turned, drawn by the subtle electricity in the air. Something about this man didn't fit the world the bully thought he controlled. Yet, instead of backing down, the man's aggression only intensified. "Did you just talk back to me?" The bully hissed, stepping closer, chest puffed, hands twitching as if itching for a fight. "I said watch where you're going." The older man remained silent for a beat, then tilted his head slightly, not in mockery, but in observation. His gaze didn't waver. "I am not your enemy," he said, voice calm but piercing, like ice under sunlight. "But your choices today may define what happens next." The bully laughed, a cruel, sharp sound. "Define what happens next? You're just some old man. You don't get to talk to me like that." His friends nearby snickered, egging him on, their laughter adding fuel to the fire. The older man made no move. He didn't flinch. His calmness was infuriating, like a mirror reflecting the bully's anger. Every word the bully shouted only emphasized the older man's serene composure. And with every second, the people around them leaned in, drawn to the unfolding drama. Then the bully took another step, this time closer than necessary, almost invading the older man's space. "I don't care who you think you are," he growled. "Stay out of my way." He jutted his chin forward, ready to intimidate. But the older man didn't move. He simply exhaled slowly, a soft, measured breath that seemed to carry more weight than words. He glanced at the bully, his eyes calm, almost sad. "I am not here to challenge you, yet you have chosen to challenge yourself." The crowd shifted. Mothers clutched their children slightly closer. Vendors paused mid-sale. Everyone felt it, the tension rising like a storm about to break. Phones recorded, eyes widened. There was something electric in the air, a strange anticipation. People couldn't put their finger on it, but they sensed this was not going to end like any ordinary argument. The bully, now visibly frustrated, took a step back, huffed, and shoved the older man's shoulder, not hard but enough to test him. "Old man," I said, "move," he shouted. The older man's expression didn't change. His voice remained calm, measured, but carried a weight the bully could not ignore. "Your actions will have consequences beyond your understanding." The bully's face twisted in confusion and anger. He glanced around, expecting the crowd to side with him, expecting fear, submission, maybe a fight. Instead, he found silence. Eyes were fixed on him. Phones were recording. Every witness felt the tension, the unspoken warning. And in that moment, a subtle thought flickered across the bully's mind, too late to matter, too fleeting to act upon. He had underestimated the man in front of him. He had assumed that age equaled weakness, that calmness equaled submission. But already in those seconds, the scales had shifted. Because what the bully didn't know, and what no one around him suspected, was that this calm older man was not just any man. He was someone who had faced far worse than impatience and arrogance. He was someone trained, disciplined, and capable of consequences the bully could not even imagine. The stage was set. The first words had been exchanged. The bully had made the first aggressive move, and now everything was about to escalate beyond anyone's expectations. Before we move forward, pause for a moment. If you've ever seen someone stay calm under pressure, comment below where you were and what you would have done. Salute to those who hold their composure, no matter how much chaos surrounds them. The older man's calmness didn't just frustrate the bully, it enraged him. Each step the bully took, each shout he unleashed, seemed to bounce off an invisible barrier the older man carried. He was like water, unshakable, flowing, indifferent to the force that tried to displace him, and the crowd began to notice. People paused mid-step, frozen by the unusual tension in the air. Phones were raised, fingers trembling slightly as they recorded the confrontation. There was something magnetic about the older man's calm. It wasn't fear, it was control. A control so absolute it seemed to bend the energy of the entire market around him. The bully, on the other hand, was a storm contained in flesh and fury, a man who assumed his aggression alone could dominate any situation.
"Old man, I'm talking to you."
The bully snapped, leaning closer, face red with frustration. "You think standing there quietly makes you strong? You're pathetic." The older man didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He simply tilted his head slightly, his eyes locking with the bully's in a gaze that felt like it could see straight into his soul. The air between them was thick, heavy, charged with anticipation, and in that stillness, the bully felt something he couldn't define, a flicker of doubt, the tiniest crack in his assumed superiority. "Pathetic," the older man said softly, almost a whisper. "Perhaps. Or perhaps you have to understand the consequences of your choices." The crowd shifted nervously. Vendors paused mid-transaction, carts teetering, the soft clatter of dropped coins echoing across the aisle. Children stopped laughing, sensing the shift in energy, the unspoken danger. Phones clicked record. Eyes widened. Every witness could feel the storm about to break, even if they didn't know its form yet. The bully's friends laughed, trying to hide their unease with mockery.
"Hey, relax! It's just an old guy, you're overreacting."
One jeered, though his eyes flicked nervously toward the older man. They could sense it too, though none dared say it aloud. This wasn't an ordinary man. "Overreacting," the older man repeated, calm as a still lake. "No, I am merely observing your actions, and they are reckless." The bully stepped closer, chest heaving, fists clenched. "You've got a lot of nerve standing there like you own the place. Don't think I won't teach you a lesson." Still, the older man remained motionless, his hands relaxed at his sides, his gaze unwavering. "I am not here for confrontation," he said, "but you've chosen confrontation, and when someone chooses wrong, consequences follow." The bully's rage intensified. He raised his voice, drawing the attention of the entire market. "Everybody see this.
This old man thinks he can talk to me like that. Let's see how tough he really is."
That's when the first signs of fear appeared, not in the older man but in the crowd. People whispered, exchanging glances. Some took cautious steps back. Even the bully's friends began to hesitate, sensing the wrong energy around him. There was something in the older man's calm that wasn't just confidence. It was power, controlled, invisible, and terrifying to anyone who underestimated it. The bully couldn't handle it. He leaned closer, voice cracking slightly from his own anger. I said, "Move, old man. Or do you want me to?" Before he could finish, the older man tilted his head again, his calm gaze piercing. "Do you really wish to test me?" His voice remained soft, but the weight behind it pressed down like a physical force. "Because you may not like the answer." The bully froze for a brief moment, unnerved. He had expected fear, submission, maybe even a flinch, but none of that came. Instead, the older man's calm was almost suffocating in its intensity, a silent warning wrapped in serenity. The crowd leaned in closer, sensing the tension spike higher than it ever should have. "Go ahead." The bully hissed finally, thinking he could intimidate by motion alone. He jabbed a finger in the older man's chest. "Show me what you've got." The older man didn't move. He didn't react physically. He just exhaled slowly, as if the act of breathing itself was enough to contain the storm. Around him, the world seemed to pause. Vendors froze, children's laughter disappeared, and the market itself felt like it was holding its breath. And then the bully laughed, a harsh, grating sound meant to assert dominance, but it rang hollow. Every fiber of his body was tense, his aggression now tinged with confusion. Something about this calm man, about the stillness in his eyes, made him doubt. Not loudly, not consciously, but deep down the instinctive, undeniable part of him that knew he was in over his head. The older man leaned slightly forward, voice still soft, measured. "This could end peacefully, but only if you step back. The choice is yours." The bully's anger reached its peak. Every muscle in his body coiled like a spring. The crowd leaned closer. Phones clicked record faster. The tension was unbearable, like the quiet before a storm that everyone could sense but no one could stop. And then, in a moment no one would forget, the bully made his fateful choice. He crossed the line he could never uncross. The first move toward chaos had been made. And for everyone watching, there was only one thought in their minds: this was not going to end well for him. The bully's face was twisted in anger, red with frustration, veins standing out on his neck. Every instinct screamed that he was about to assert dominance, to humiliate the older man in front of the growing crowd. His friends shuffled nervously behind him, unsure if this was just bravado or a real threat. Phones were recording, people whispering. The market seemed to vibrate with tension, each heartbeat of the onlookers sensing to the slow, tense dance unfolding. Without a word, the bully took another step forward. His hand twitched, raised just slightly, signaling intent, an action the crowd immediately noticed. Children stopped mid-laugh, mothers instinctively pulled their kids closer, and vendors froze, holding their goods mid-air. A soft gasp escaped a passerby, as if the air itself had thickened. "Move out of my way, old man," the bully growled, voice cracking slightly from the pressure of his own anger. "Or do you want me to?" His sentence never finished. In one fluid motion, he slapped the older man across the face. The sound wasn't muffled, it was sharp, echoing across the crowded market. The slap had force, precision, and arrogance all in one, an act meant to dominate, to humiliate publicly. But the reaction it provoked was nothing he expected. For a heartbeat, the market froze. Silence, pure, suffocating silence. People's mouths hung open. Phones were still mid-record, the red recording light capturing a moment that felt suspended in time. Birds that had been fluttering overhead seemed to pause. Even the music from the street violinist disappeared, as though the world itself recognized the gravity of what had just happened. The bully stepped back, expecting either shock or submission. He expected the older man to flinch, to crumble under the public insult, to prove him right. But the older man didn't move. His eyes, calm as ever, met the bully's with a quiet intensity that made the arrogance in the man's posture falter. The older man raised a single hand, not to strike, not to retaliate, but in a measured, almost imperceptible gesture that said everything. The air around him seemed heavier, charged with authority, control, and a warning that words could never convey. The bully's bravado faltered. His friends looked at him, then at the older man, unsure now who they were really dealing with. Every person in the market felt it, the shift from a minor confrontation to something far more serious. The bully had assumed he was testing strength. Instead, he had triggered a force that could not be measured by muscle alone. The older man's calm was a weapon, silent yet devastating, and it hung in the air like an invisible wall no one dared breach. People whispered, low murmurs passing like ripples through a pond. "Who is he?" someone asked. He didn't even flinch. The bully's pulse raced. For the first time in his life, arrogance wasn't enough. He looked around, seeing the crowd's eyes on him, the phones recording, the street vendors staring with quiet awe. He realized too late that this wasn't just an old man. This was someone who commanded presence, control, and consequences in ways he couldn't understand or survive. And then the older man spoke, not in anger, not in threat, just calmly, softly, but with a weight that felt like it could crush a man's pride. "I warned you," he said. "Your actions have consequences." The crowd's attention sharpened. The words seemed to reverberate, carried not by volume but by sheer authority. The bully swallowed hard, unsure if he had misjudged the situation, or if he had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The older man tilted his head slightly, not in mockery, not in fear, but in observation. He was assessing, calculating, a predator in patience. Every second stretched longer than it should have. The bully's friends shuffled nervously, now sensing the wrong energy. They whispered among themselves, panic hidden behind forced bravado. The market itself seemed suspended. Conversations ceased. The music of the street violinist returned slowly, hesitantly, as though the world was testing its courage. Birds finally resumed their flight, scattering across the rooftops. Children clutched their parents' hands, sensing a danger they couldn't define. And the bully, he realized somewhere deep inside, that everything had changed in a single, irreversible moment. One slap, one mistake, one misjudged gesture. The calm older man had not reacted, but the weight of his presence alone was a silent threat no one could ignore. The older man's eyes scanned the bully one last time, calm, patient, but filled with quiet warning. The moment of public humiliation had passed. What came next would not be for display. What came next would be the consequences the bully had never imagined. In that frozen moment, every person in the market understood something unspoken. This was a turning point. A line had been crossed, and no one, not the bully, not his friends, not the crowd, would forget what had just happened. Because the calm older man didn't react like anyone expected. He didn't need to. The storm had begun. The market remained frozen, the echo of the slap lingering in the air like a warning that could not be ignored. People's eyes darted between the older man and the bully, sensing the tension crackling like static electricity. The crowd held its breath, unsure whether to intervene, run, or simply watch. Phones recorded silently, capturing every second, every detail, every subtle shift in posture. The older man stood perfectly still, his expression calm, almost serene. He did not raise his voice. He did not flinch. Yet, every motion, every controlled breath, radiated authority that seemed to bend the energy of the market itself. It was as if the world slowed down around him, every heartbeat stretching into eternity. The bully, on the other hand, was a storm coiled too tightly, muscles trembling with rage and frustration. He had expected fear. He had expected submission. He had expected the old man to crumble, and instead there was nothing. The older man finally spoke, his voice soft, measured and deliberate, yet somehow every word carried weight. "I tried to stop you, not for me, but for you," he said, each syllable like a slow, moving knife slicing through arrogance. "You are on a path that will lead to regret if you do not step back now." The bully laughed, a harsh, forced sound meant to assert dominance. "Regret? You think you can scare me? You're just an old man." He jabbed his finger toward the older man, trying to punctuate his bravado. But something about the calm in the older man's eyes made the gesture seem absurd, almost childish. The bully's confidence wavered, though he would never admit it. "You still do not understand." The older man continued, voice calm, unwavering. "The danger you see is only what is in front of you. The real consequences, the ones you cannot imagine, are already in motion." A hush fell over the crowd. The vendors forgot to continue their transactions. Children clutched their parents' hands, and even the street musicians' bow paused mid-strike. Every person watching felt the shift. The invisible pressure that seemed to emanate from the older man. There was no threat in his tone, no aggression, only a calm certainty that unsettled everyone who tried to measure him. The bully's friends shifted uneasily behind him. One whispered, "Maybe we should back off." But the words were swallowed by the tension. The bully, too proud to show fear, masked his unease with a barked laugh. Yet deep down, something primal told him he had misjudged the situation. The older man took a slow step forward, deliberate but unhurried. His calmness was like a magnet pulling attention, and it made the bully's bravado feel heavier, more exposed. "You laugh because you believe control comes from aggression," he said softly. "But true power, true control is patience, discipline, and awareness. You've ignored all three." The crowd leaned in, sensing that something monumental was about to unfold. A subtle shift in the older man's posture hinted at readiness, not for violence, but for consequences that could not be avoided. The bully's face flickered with doubt. He glanced at the people recording on their phones, then at the vendors, then back at the older man. Every second amplified his realization he had crossed a line he could never uncross. The older man's eyes scanned the crowd briefly, as if acknowledging their presence but without breaking focus. "I have tried to give you a chance," he said, "because some mistakes can be corrected if only one chooses wisely. But you have made your choice." A low murmur passed through the crowd, rippling like waves. Everyone felt it, the silent warning that the stakes were far higher than anyone could see. This wasn't about an argument or a slap, or even public humiliation. Something far bigger, far more dangerous, was waiting beyond the surface, and no one could predict when it would arrive. The bully's hands twitched. He wanted to act, to strike, to regain the upper hand, but every instinct screamed caution. The older man's calmness was unnatural, unnerving, like the eye of a storm that could destroy everything if provoked. The bully realized deep down that his aggression had only exposed him, and that whatever was coming would not be fair. "Step back," the older man said again, voice calm yet firm, carrying the weight of authority. "Step back, and you might still walk away with your pride intact. Ignore this, and the consequences will reach far beyond what you can see right now." The bully's friends exchanged terrified glances. The surrounding crowd murmured in anticipation, whispers of curiosity, fear, and awe. No one wanted to intervene. Yet no one could look away. Every person there felt the tension building to an unbearable peak, like a bowstring pulled tighter and tighter. And in that moment, the older man didn't just wait. He commanded attention without raising his voice, without a gesture, without a threat. It was the kind of presence that left the bully exposed, vulnerable and uncertain. Something was coming, something far greater than the market, the slap, or the bully's anger. The older man tilted his head slightly, a subtle, almost imperceptible signal, hinting at readiness. Not for fight, not for retaliation, but for the inevitability that had already begun moving toward them. The crowd sensed it. Phones recorded every silent beat. Vendors leaned forward. Children clung to parents, sensing the danger they couldn't understand. The bully laughed one more time, forced, hollow, brittle. He had no idea what was on the way. He thought he understood the stakes. He did not. He assumed the older man was alone. He was wrong. Because the real danger was not standing in front of him. It was already moving, waiting, and watching. And when it arrived, the bully would finally understand the gravity of the mistake he had made. The air was thick with tension. The bully still stood frozen, chest heaving, eyes darting nervously between the older man and the growing crowd. For the first time, he realized that he had misjudged the situation completely. The older man's calm was unnerving, unnatural, and now it was clear that it was more than mere composure. It was a presence that carried weight far beyond anyone in the market. Then, without warning, a low hum began to fill the air, a sound distinct from the chatter of the crowd or the street musician's soft violin. Heads turned, eyes widened. A line of black SUVs emerged from the far end of the street, tires crunching over the cobblestones, engines rumbling with authority. The vehicles moved with precision, military-like, and the crowd instinctively stepped back, forming a natural perimeter around the older man and the bully. The bully's friends muttered among themselves, panic creeping in. Phones were raised, but even the hands recording trembled as they captured something no one could have anticipated. The older man didn't flinch, didn't speak, didn't move. He simply watched, his calm unchanged, his eyes quietly assessing. Then the doors of the SUVs opened. Federal agents dressed in black tactical gear emerged in a swift, coordinated motion, surrounding the scene. Their presence was imposing, commanding, absolute. The crowd instinctively stepped back, creating space, whispers and gasps filling the air. Even the bully's bravado faltered. He took a half step backward, realizing that whatever force they had just underestimated was now more real, more dangerous than he could comprehend. And then, from the lead SUV, a figure stepped forward, a man in a crisp suit, exuding authority. He moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to command, a presence that demanded attention without a word. He approached the older man, his gaze locking onto him with unmistakable recognition. "Dad, are you okay?" the man asked, voice calm but urgent, a subtle tremor betraying concern. The crowd's collective jaw dropped. Phones captured every reaction. The bully froze, eyes wide with disbelief. He finally understood the magnitude of his mistake. The older man, the calm, unflinching figure he had thought was defenseless, was not just anyone. He was a man whose presence commanded respect, not because of fear, not because of aggression, but because he had power, authority, and connections beyond imagination. The older man nodded slightly, a faint smile touching his lips. "I am fine," he said simply, his calm unbroken. The bully's friends stumbled backward, murmuring frantic apologies. But it was too late. The realization had hit, the slap, the arrogance, the misjudgment. It had all been directed at someone far beyond their understanding. The lead agent, flanking the chief of Homeland Security, turned to secure the perimeter. "Sir, the situation is contained," he said, eyes scanning for any remaining threats. The bully's mind raced, his heart pounded. Every instinct screamed to run, but his legs felt like lead. He had made a mistake that could never be undone. The older man had not just diffused the immediate threat, he had unleashed consequences the bully could not escape. The crowd, meanwhile, watched in awe. Whispers of disbelief turned into murmurs of admiration. "Ooh, who is he?" someone asked. Another replied, I think he's some kind of government official." The older man looked at the bully one last time. His expression was calm, almost gentle, but there was no mistaking the silent message. Respect had been ignored, and now the full weight of accountability had arrived. The bully swallowed hard, realizing that the man he had disrespected, the one he had thought powerless, was far beyond any ordinary reckoning. The chief of Homeland Security placed a reassuring hand on his father's shoulder, eyes scanning the crowd with a practiced intensity. "Everything's under control," he said. But the meaning was clear. Control had never left their hands, even when the bully thought he held the power. The market slowly began to relax, the tension easing like a receding tide. Vendors resumed their work, children cautiously returned to play, and phones lowered, but the memory of the moment would not fade. Everyone present had witnessed something extraordinary, a man's calmness, his discipline, and his authority turning what could have been humiliation into a lesson about respect, consequence, and awareness. The bully finally realized what he had done. One rash, arrogant decision had exposed him to forces far beyond his comprehension. His friends stared at him, fear and disbelief mirrored in their faces. There would be no laughter, no boasting, no redemption in that moment, only the silent acknowledgement that they had miscalculated entirely. And as the SUVs pulled away, leaving only awe-struck onlookers behind, the older man remained calm, unshaken, his presence a reminder that respect is not granted by fear, nor earned through aggression. It is carried quietly, patiently, and with authority that cannot be challenged by ignorance or arrogance. The bully, humbled and terrified, knew one thing for certain: he had underestimated a man whose strength, composure, and connections were far beyond what he could ever imagine. And the lesson, captured on hundreds of phones, would echo far beyond the market, a stark reminder of the consequences of arrogance. Because in that moment, the world understood something simple, yet profound: some mistakes are unforgivable, not because of revenge, but because the consequences have already arrived. The market had slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but the air was still thick with awe. People whispered to each other, exchanging glances filled with disbelief and admiration. Even as the black SUVs disappeared down the street, the echo of authority and composure left behind lingered like a tangible presence. Vendors resumed selling their goods. Children began to play cautiously again. But everyone's attention still lingered on the older man, who had transformed a simple afternoon into a moment no one would ever forget. The bully, meanwhile, sat slumped against a fruit cart, his chest heaving, the weight of his mistake pressing down on him like a physical force. His friends hovered uncertainly around him, unable to speak, unable to defend their earlier arrogance. One whispered, almost inaudibly, "Well, we had no idea." The older man, however, remained calm. Not a flicker of anger crossed his face. Not a trace of vindictiveness. He straightened his posture, hands resting gently at his sides, and looked at the crowd with quiet clarity. His voice, when he spoke, was soft but carried a weight no one could ignore. "Respect should never depend on who someone is," he said, eyes sweeping the crowd. "It should not be earned through fear, nor demanded through force. Respect is given because every human being deserves it. That is the lesson you must carry with you." The crowd absorbed every word. There was a pause, as if the market itself had stopped to listen. People nodded slowly, understanding not just the words, but the meaning behind them, the calm, the discipline, the strength that required no aggression to command authority. Even the bully looked up, his face pale, a mixture of shame and understanding settling in. A mother whispered to her child, "Do you see that? That is how a person carries himself. That is true strength." And in that moment, the child's eyes widened, storing the lesson for a lifetime. The older man turned back to the bully, who still struggled to comprehend the events. "I do not seek revenge," he said calmly. "What you did was wrong, yes, but my goal is not to harm you. My goal is to show you that every choice has consequences, and that arrogance blinds more than strength ever does." The bully's shoulders slumped further. There was a quiet, almost spiritual realization dawning on him. Power is not about size, aggression, or loudness. True power is patience. True power is awareness. True power is knowing the weight of your actions and the responsibility that comes with them. Around them, the crowd began to murmur approval, whispers turning into quiet applause. Phones lowered, not because people stopped recording, but because they were in awe, humbled by the display of discipline, control, and humanity. This was not violence. This was authority. This was morality made visible. The older man took a slow breath, turning back toward the vendors and the families. Life is full of moments where you can choose calm over chaos, patience over rage, understanding over aggression, he said. It is in these moments that your character is defined. Never forget that. The crowd, moved by the lesson, began to cheer softly, not for conflict, but for virtue. People clapped not out of spectacle, but out of respect. Respect for composure, respect for discipline, respect for a man who had turned arrogance into humility without ever raising his voice. The bully, now silent, understood fully the gravity of his misjudgment. He glanced at the older man, then at his friends, finally muttering a soft apology, words that came too late for arrogance, but perfectly timed for learning. The older man simply nodded once, acknowledging the recognition of fault without seeking any satisfaction in it. Then, with a final sweep of his eyes across the crowd, the older man turned and began walking away, calm, composed, unshaken. The market felt different after he passed. The tension had dissipated, but the lesson remained, lingering in the air like a quiet echo that would not fade. And the crowd understood this was more than a lesson in humility. It was a lesson in life. In every interaction, in every choice, in every moment of confrontation, we have a decision: chaos or calm, arrogance or understanding, disrespect or humanity. As the older man disappeared into the distance, leaving the bully and the crowd behind, the market seemed transformed. Conversations resumed, but the lesson remained etched in memory. Phones had recorded the moment, yes, but the real memory was in the minds of those who had witnessed true discipline and authority, a lesson that could not be deleted, forgotten, or ignored. The older man's final words lingered in the minds of everyone present. Respect is not given because of fear. Respect is not given because of status. Respect is given because every human being deserves it. Choose wisely in life. Choose calm. Choose awareness. Choose humanity. And as the camera panned over the crowd, viewers could feel the emotion, the awe, and the quiet power of a man who had done what so few can: command respect not through strength, but through composure, patience, and the dignity of a life fully lived. If you believe respect should be given to everyone, comment respect below. Share this story to remind others that calm, discipline, and humanity are stronger than arrogance, aggression, or ego.